Charles Leclerc said it, folks, not me. Over at Ferrari, it is indeed now or never. And he is seriously not kidding, Ferrari is fighting for his life right now. They've slipped to a lonely fourth in the constructors, they missed out on silverware again, leading to their chairman John Elkann letting loose at the F1 team in a way which is similar to, "Why can't you be like your brother Weck?" Classic Ferrari, right? And in the midst of all of this, both Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc have actually conducted themselves rather admirably, if you ask me, given their social media heft, and together they could easily push back at the likes of the heft of Ferrari. And instead, I think they've managed to use their influence internally, and it might actually have wound up with the desired effect. Because there seems to be far less venom aimed in their direction, and for good reason. It seems like right now they're going, "Hey, guys, relax. We're solving things right now to make sure 2026 is better. We're going to change a lot of things, and we're going to make you really happy. Please don't leave us." Their stock remains high amongst the Formula One fandom because many members of the Tifosi especially can see the SF25 for what it was. It was a pig. And Leclerc's now or never wording is a bit of a warning. If next year goes wrong, Ferrari could risk losing both he and Hamilton. That long-fabled allure of theirs to be able to get drivers to join them may no longer be as potent. It would require another reset, akin to what we saw back in 2021. In any case, there are plenty of Ferrari quotes to unpack here, as well as Charles Leclerc, so we'll start off with the monegasques for your consideration. It's tough. Whether it's the toughest or not, I don't know. I tend to forget those negative emotions as quickly as possible, so I don't know if it's the worst one, but for sure it's a very disappointing one. The whole team is hugely motivated for next year because it's such a big change, a huge opportunity to show what Ferrari is capable of. It's now or never, so I really hope that we will start this new era on the right foot, because it's important for the 4 years after. By race 6 or 7, that's about Miami, Canada time, folks, I think we'll have a good idea of who are the teams that will be dominating for the 4 years after. I rate 2025 actually high. I think I've done a good job. But again, there are always things that you can do better. You're right, Charles. It is now or never, because Ferrari's fighting as to whether or not he can actually even compete for the rest of the decade, and yeah, Charles Leclerc saying, "Hey, I did pretty good." So teams, just remember that. Of course, the emotional declaration from Charles using such a blunt phrase as now or never, with a pretty specific deadline as to when teams will begin to know where each other stands, it's not him projecting melodrama or anything. It's quite a legitimate situation, because his own manager talked about it, that next year's drivers market is going to be absolutely bananas, and I just realised Charles Leclerc and bananas, that's actually quite a fitting analogy. You seriously think that Leclerc would want to wait on the sidelines, because we're reaching a really important part of his career where he is in his late 20s, similar age to Max, and he is going to be approaching 30. A similar era of career that his buddy Carlos Sainz is in, and look what kind of decision he made 1 year earlier. It might prove to be a bit of a banger. I know we all joke about whether or not he is actually paying attention to what Ferrari's doing, and him completely loving his choice, but remember, he is like the meme with the frog and the tea. But make no mistake, Leclerc is very much issuing an ultimatum, but he is framing it in a way which is very diplomatic, very calm, not dramatic, but it is there. Because you seriously think that if Ferrari completely screw the pooch here, he is going to just say, "Oh, I'll wait 3 years, maybe they'll come good come 2029, then I'll make a decision." And he's also right to point out that in an aero and power unit reset, early winners tend to stay winners because the best concept buys you a lot of stability in many respects. Everybody rises up. Look at Red Bull in 2022, after they had a difficult start, and then how Ferrari did not do the same thing in that same year. Basically, he's not going to wait as long as his contract to find out if Ferrari got it right. He'll put his heart and soul into it, yeah, absolutely, but if both are broken during the flyaway races again, that pain will be hard or impossible to soothe by their prancing horse this time. There's also stuff related to next year's car. It's not about Charles entirely. F1 technical analyst Rosario Juliana claims that the car will have little or nothing in common with the SF25. An admission perhaps that maybe last year's concept was a cul-de-sac, and that Ferrari have chosen to once again bring in a clean sheet architecture rather than trying to patch an existing one. It reminds us all of what happened last year when they said that the SF25 was 95% different to the SF24, which when you look back on it was objectively the better car. So this time around, this isn't coming from a means of, we're going to try and extract even more performance. This is more like, we realized that this car was an absolute dud. We need to change it. I mean, last year they didn't have to change it, but they did, and look where they wound up. There are also reports indicating that in terms of mainline development on the SF25, they sort of cut ties around the early stages of the season, around about April, so not long after the double disqualification disaster, when it became very clear that lifting and coasting would be a very common phenomena. And it's the kind of thing you just have to do when you realize that within a cost cap situation that the car is completely not salvageable, or not to the point where you can get it to be winning constructors' titles or drivers' titles. So what you can deduce from what Leclerc is saying and what Fred Vasseur, the team boss of Ferrari, is trying to signal is that maybe all of this is important to try and make it very clear that they are trying to fix things and doing things in a really overhauly manner, that this is something that they are not going to be sitting their laurels on or basically putting their heads in the sand. In fact, Fred's saying that Charles being dissatisfied is actually a good thing, that he actually gets itchy feet when things are going really smoothly. And then this via motorsport.com comes from Ferrari's head of track engineering, Matteo Tognali, himself insisting the relationship with Hamilton is absolutely fine, no worries here, all while Ferrari leaked that next year's car shares basically nothing with this year's. It's a controlled demolition in my opinion. They're not exactly imploding after what happened this year, but what they are certainly doing is they're getting a flamethrower at the SF25 and scorching it to the ends of the earth until it's just a bunch of ashes because it's an easy target. Them doing that and saying that next year's car will have nothing in common with it is just so easy to try and calm the tifosi down. You can get in the bin with the SF1000, matey boy. That's just easy to do. Yeah, we admit the car was bad, but we're not going to be carrying it over. There you go. And maybe what Ferrari's also trying to do is fighting for its own memory and legacy in the sport. That's what's pretty important here. Because the idea of what Ferrari used to be when they were winning titles fairly consistently is heavier than any car they will ever build going forward, unless it proves to be continuing that trend. And if that is the underlying play here amidst all of the stuff that we've been talking about thus far, then it sort of starts to line up all of this messaging in a way. For example, Fred Vasseur's stance that he would hate it if his drivers were happy is not really him straight up hoping or anything like. I think he's just mainly trying to acknowledge to everyone that the task that he's been afforded is a very big one, including managing those two drivers. Because yes, he knows them very, very well, but the very important thing to realise here is that he knew them best when they were newbies, when they were greenhorns, before they started Formula 1, or in the case of Leclerc especially, as he was getting his toes into Formula 1. And on top of all of that, Ferrari has had to deal with for so many years a structure which is absolutely and infamously belligerent and stubborn, and they've gotten the car concept quite wrong after starting off so well in 2022. Basically, they seemed out of touch with reality, and you might be then clapping back at me and saying, well, wait a minute, 2024 was pretty good, Law. Well, you mustn't forget the mid-season slump they had between Spain and Hungary when they finally got themselves back on a fairly decent path. Had they not had that, they probably might have romped off with the constructors by a fairly decent margin, and we wouldn't be nearly as pressured as we are right now, because if that turned out to be a winning formula, they would have just kept things relatively the same, and Lewis Hamilton probably would have had a much better season. And I think also that what Fred's trying to do, saying that, we like it when we're dissatisfied, he basically tells us what we need to push, it tells the staff that are already there and maybe thinking of leaving to simply not leaving. Criticism? It's okay. It's really important and it's natural. Criticism and dissatisfaction, it becomes a tool. It's not a means of venting aggression or frustration or anything like that. It's just part of the gig. But going back to Tognali's comments about Hamilton, they do read a bit like damage limitation, specifically for those working within the factory. Because when a star driver struggles and the story becomes the relationship is broken amongst the media, and that Lewis should probably walk away now and not damage his legacy further, you do risk engineers picking sides and isolating themselves. It's all about stopping internal tribalism from spreading, because many people within Ferrari are going to be looking at all of the press and it's going to make them feel down. Negative comments about the team they chose to work for, that they've probably been working for a very long time, they might start to have their own phones of doubts and their own spanners of speculation and be thinking, Mamma mia, I've got to fight for my own job here. I've got to pick a side. Well, what Fred and co are trying to say is that you don't need to do that. Just blame the media for all of this. It's got nothing to do from within. That's what Vasseur has very much been doing, because I remember all the kerfuffle around Miami. Fred talked it down massively. But then when you put that together with what Lewis Hamilton has been saying, that he is unplugging himself from the Matrix in not even having his phone on him for the winter break, that's a pretty big admission that he is suffering from major burnout. And quite frankly, very valid burnout if you ask me, because he's been trying to do two jobs at once, driving a car, which absolutely has turned out to be a bit of a pig, and also trying to rewrite Ferrari from within using the vast amount of experience he has from helping to co-write with Toto the Mercedes playbook of winning constructors and drivers' titles. You would think that Ferrari would be willing to at least hear him out a little bit, but when you get this thing that just came out as I was writing the script from Maurizio Arrivabene, the former team principal around the time of Sebastian Vettel, it's not comfortable reading, saying that Hamilton's supposed documents reminded him of how Sebastian once tried to modernise the team and met the same exact resistance. It's the same pattern here, seemingly. Great drivers arriving with ideas that worked elsewhere, but Ferrari's culture often rejecting outside input. And it certainly doesn't help that Lewis doesn't have a dream team immediately there to back him up. So therefore, this would make whatever feedback Lewis has more of a test as to whether Ferrari has really changed since the time of Sebastian Vettel and even before that. But Arrivabene's words here especially are very chilling for Team LH. When a driver starts playing engineer, that's it. Then it's really over. And quite frankly, if Arrivabene is proven right, because he was very much a stalwart Ferrari figure, and they just choose to ignore Lewis's advice, then he's got every reason to walk away. What's the point of flogging a dead horse here? And then, of course, we've got to talk about the John Elkann talk less comment, because that was a bit of an incendiary fireball, wasn't it? You know, praising mechanics and engineers, saying, oh, the F1 team, they're doing fine there because we won the DHL Pit Stop of the Year award, and we won that title. Oh, it's the drivers, the rest, which are the problem. All in the midst of trying to call for unity and looking to world endurance, saying that that team's pretty calm, they can get the job done. Why can't you? Understandably, the Tifosi didn't buy into it. They absolutely hated it. It did not land the way Elkann probably respected. And the way that Hamilton and Leclerc conducted themselves brought them a huge amount of respect. And it's been quite telling that Elkann in that regard, in that particular context, has actually been relatively quiet. Because that entire saga made that board look extremely out of touch. And they are out of touch, because that's how it was supposed to be. Okay, so what can we do with all of these tidbits going into such an important year? Well, you can certainly think of a lot of scenarios which I am more than happy to go through, so get yourself comfortable. One possibility is that Ferrari has decided next year is not solely about the car, but more about trying to redesign the way they go about things, maybe taking on board some of Lewis's words, because they did bring in Mercedes key figures such as Loic Serra from Mercedes in a chassis technical leadership role, and they of course brought Jerome D'Ambrosio as Fred's second-hand man, as well as leading the driver academy. And that is very important to remember because Jerome was lined up to be the successor of Toto Wolff over at Mercedes. Yeah, those hires are notable, but they have not made waves just yet. It's very much a very internal affair. We have not seen the fruits of their labours just yet. Their work is all of the stuff in the shadows. It's not particularly sexy or obvious. It's about interfaces and structure and accountability and workflows. It's not something that the casual fan can really fully get behind and thinking, wow! Just muddle through 2025, get that out of the way, and then try and start again. Only then will we realise that those two Mercedes hires proven to be really effective, as well as trying to optimise Lewis especially. And then the whole thing about next year's car having nothing in common with this year's car, it could be a signal to the driver market as well, saying that, oh, we are prepared to completely burn a car which was rubbish. We are not clinging onto it for dear life, thinking there might be something left to it, which is arguably what Charles Leclerc was trying to do last year, because he felt that there might have been hope in trying to win races, or maybe a desperate bid for the title. But instead, it seems to be more of a signal that if we are going to be losing these drivers, we are willing to listen to driver feedback. Please consider us in your options. If we give you a call, please do like what everyone else has been doing over history and immediately answer the call, putting your heart in front of your head. Or maybe it's trying to say that the driver market is not necessary to worry about, that Leclerc and Hamilton's pain has not been ignored ultimately. Because teams recruit on belief, and to try and ensure that the belief of their current employees is not wavering or completely jaded and they do not abandon ship. Because I can certainly imagine there are a lot of people who are tempted to join Ferrari, but they're not entirely sure whether or not it'd be worth it given the culture that has festered over the last few years. Because if they're going to end up working for a team that will not listen to their feedback and has a history of doing so, that is a very valid concern. Not just the whole of up sticks and moving to Italy. And another thing you could consider is that Leclerc saying now or never using such a blunt phrase is a way of trying to get himself out in the fact that he is blinded by loyalty. It gives Charles permission to look around, make a rational career move without looking like he abandoned Ferrari, the group that believed in him in the first place. It's a bit of a psychological trick that companies use when they say, "We're reviewing strategic options," telling the world, look, don't be too shocked should the worst happen. Don't be surprised. And another is that Hamilton's supposed documents were meant to prove a point which he has noticed, that Ferrari's bottleneck is all to do with their processes, not their lack of talent, because they are very talented people, and if it turns out that Hamilton's words fall on deaf ears and Riva Bene was proven right, that Ferrari does not like outside input, then it will pretty much prove everything that Hamilton has realised over the course of this year, that it'll be just one thing after another, that his voice is not welcome, that maybe the only reason he came on board was to maybe sell a bunch more cars using his name, being exploited. Or if he is lucky and they are listening to him, that maybe Ferrari cannot enact these change fast enough for him to be able to be there and realise it, because time is very much not on his side. Unlike it might have been had he made this move to Ferrari 5 or 10 years previously, when he would have had far more time to actually realise that particular opportunity. Because, say what you will about Michael Schumacher, it took him a good 5 years, 5 seasons, to then realise that first title for Ferrari since Jody Scheckter. And okay, this one might be a little bit spicy for some, and it might require the spanner here, but maybe Ferrari is using Lewis Hamilton as some sort of lightning rod on purpose. No, I'm not trying to say they're trying to hurt him deliberately, but they are using his status within Formula One as a means to distract from all of the other people within the organisation, so that means they can get on with the job in developing next year's car. Because if it turns out to have worked, and then next year's car is competitive, and it can actually get Lewis back on the podium, and maybe winning a few races, or maybe having a bid at the title at least at the beginning, then this might have been worth it, and then all of 2025 will have been forgotten, because, hey, Lewis is winning again! Because Ferrari are a global reality show, as well as a race team. When things go wrong, that noise is derailing, and Hamilton can draw the headlines naturally. That will buy the factory some time to build next year's car properly. Because if you want a villain or a tragedy, you stare at Lewis. Meanwhile, Sarah and his aero team can get on with doing the mathematics. Yes, this would require plenty of internal reassurance aimed at Hamilton to make sure that the media chatter is something he doesn't need to pay attention to, which you could argue has actually contributed to him unplugging himself from the Matrix. Then there's the specific time frame that Leclerc framed out of around the Miami or Canadian Grand Prix. Because as I touched upon earlier, early season mastering of the regulations may dictate where teams will be for the next year, 2, or even 3. And if that turns out to be true, Ferrari are doing the most expensive thing they can possibly do within the cost cap regulations, even though they have been inflated a little bit more for 2026. Is that admitting that the previous architecture is completely rubbish, and then you've just got to start with a brand new concept, because everyone's doing the same thing almost. And if you can do that, and then the drivers are happy with what they got, then they can maybe just relax a little bit. If they can just get through those flyaway races, and Lewis and Charles have a fairly decent car that they're happy with, they are in contention for podiums and wins, certainly a lot better than in 2025, it'll at least push them away from maybe pressing the eject button. Keeping them on board for that little bit longer to ensure they can get that platform right will make it so much more relaxed. They won't be spending the next 3 years trying to figure out a problem they fundamentally have. I mean, just look at what Mercedes have been dealing with ground effect. And you might be wanting to know if next year it can lead to a situation where both Lewis and Charles exit at the same time. It's entirely possible, I think, but it's certainly not a guarantee because, well, nobody knows where the teams are going to be for 2026 until race 6 or 7. But you certainly don't need to know the contract to figure out whether or not the situation is possible. I think it certainly is a reality that Ferrari might have to understand and hope that never comes to fruition. Leclerc is in his prime and Ferrari knows he's recruitable. He is desirable. His own framing suggests that he'll be treating the early part of next year as the evidence window for his decision. Hamilton, though, is a little bit different because, well, he's older. He's already won life, as he said, and calling it a day at any time is a viable scenario that many people wouldn't have hard feelings about. And the reputational risk for Ferrari is real because the story writes itself. Because under their watch, Lewis's childhood dream of maybe racing with Ferrari one day turned out to be a sour and cynical nightmare. It would be on their shoulders that happened. You can already see the emotional exhaustion in his comments. It's been one thing after another. I do feel sorry for Lewis in this situation. This did not work out the way he hoped it would, where Ferrari would be immediately behind him on day one and started off well like Alonso and Vettel and Schumacher, legends before him. Even Alain Prost had a fairly stable beginning with Ferrari. I mean, it did go sour with that tractor comment eventually, but it started off fairly solidly with being in the title ship contention in 1990. I mean, when it gets that bad, where the only nice thing he has to say about his weekend, this being around Qatar, was the weather, that was a rough point. Yes, next year very much screams franchise-defining energy here. So, okay, next year turns out to be absolutely terrible. What do they do and try and pivot? Well, they've got to pick a brand new story and they've got to stick to it, that's what. And oh yes, without firing too many people, or indeed, nobody. Also showing measurable improvement in execution, even if the car is not a title winner. And Elkan's words, lost partially in the external fury understandably, was about trying to band together. Or at least that was the intention. Because you've got to remember that Fred Vasseur's contract was extended last year, so if they can stop internal churn from happening, then prestige slowly will rebuild because the paddock will look to Ferrari and believe they are governable. And then another route could be pivoting toward youth, because Oliver Behrman's had a great rookie year with Haas, and he's a Ferrari Academy darling, and potentially then being partnered come 2027 with soon-to-be F2 racer Rafael Camara, having just come away from also attaining the FIA's Rookie of the Year award. So if Ferrari is looking for a complete and utter overhaul of the way its culture is managed, then getting in Behrman as the lead driver and then Camara as the rookie would be a really suitable bet, as well as signalling that the Ferrari Driver Academy is a very, very good one, because look at what Mercedes have been able to do, showcasing Russell and Antonelli leading their charge, both Mercedes junior recruits. And it also lowers the political temperature because, hey, come on, they're youngsters. They're just finding their feet and they're with Ferrari. The huge amount of pressure on their shoulders is magnifyingly more than at other teams. So cut them some slack, yeah? It buys Ferrari some time as well, because you look to what happened with Haas in 2021 when they were nowhere. They were waiting for 2022. So having Mick Schumacher and the egg was a way of them just trying to cut their teeth, as Gunther Steiner says in his books, without there being too much scrutiny aimed at them because, well, the car was terrible. I mean, what best could they probably hope for consistently? 16th? But they can only pull off the youth model if the engineering core is improved or completely overhauled in a really good way, because if the car turns out to be bad and they don't realise the full potential of those Ferrari recruits, then other teams may come and knock and say, hey, we got it better, so if you want to come over to us, then you're more than welcome to. So therefore, I think all of the failures that Ferrari have been having this year, instead of trying to blame people or just completely ignore the situation, they've turned all of the politics of the SF25 into very compostable biofuel. You know, the drama being part of the rebuild. Calling next year's car a complete departure is all about granting permission for engineers to scrap bad ideas and for drivers to demand proof without looking whingy, and for leaders to reset without causing any alarm from their fans or their shareholders. And the beauty of all of this is that everything could actually be fine on the inside, yet to us on the outside, it looks really extremely high stakes. But it also does leave those on the outside scratching their heads. I mean, just look at what McLaren's had to deal with this year. High-functioning teams looking really, really weird under pressure for those who are not entirely in the know. For Ferrari, mastering that balance of the inside and the outside is harder than ever, and you could easily argue it's always been hard because, well, they're Ferrari. They're the longest-serving team in Formula One. They've got so much history behind them, and therefore it means they've got a lot of baggage behind them. Make no mistake, next year is critical. I am not diminishing that, and Leclerc's words tell you all you need to know. I mean, it's great that they're not ignoring the problem, that there might be hope that they can keep Charles Leclerc past his 2027 exit clause, but it will not really mean much if the problem persists anyway, that they come up with a solution, they're still bad. And it also means that Charles will not be waiting around, that this is their last chance, but he's framing it in a way which doesn't look accusatory or angry or aggressive. He's hoping and willing and pleading that they get things right because this is a place he knows and cherishes. It'd be so much simpler if he can just stick with a team that is competitive, that he knows from the bottom up, instead of having to take a giant leap toward another team and then maybe it doesn't go well. Carlos Sainz was lucky that it's worked out so well at Williams. Charles may not be so lucky if he makes a similar punt, but he might have no choice but to do so if next year proves to be just like 2022 when it starts off strong and then fizzles out, or if it ends up being 2025 all over again despite all the changes. Is Ferrari systematically flawed in that regard? You know, a place where he has to drive out of his skin like he did last year to try and at best get a podium. that's not where he wants to be. And Lewis, right now, he just wants to be heard, damn it. And if you've made it this far into the video, I hear you. You want another Ladderman video. Well, I can provide you one right here, and I think you will enjoy this particular one. I'll just change my clothes and I'll see you over there.